thought I was cooking Sunday dinner for two. I had no idea that when Marcus walked through the door that evening, he would bring not just his overnight bag, but a folder of bank statements proving that his parents, both earning well over $200,000 a year each, had spent the last 8 months quietly rerouting our shared life toward their comfort, one carefully framed family expense at a time. His mother had asked me once, very sweetly, how much I made. I told her. She smiled and said, "How modest." I didn't understand what she meant until the day I found the spreadsheet on his laptop, a document so precise, so carefully color-coded that it could only have been created by someone who had been planning this for a very long time, who had been watching my paycheck the way a hawk watches a field. Our apartment on the 4th floor of a building near Riverside Park smelled like rosemary and garlic on Sunday evenings. That was our ritual, mine and Marcus's, and I had built it carefully over 3 years of marriage, the way you build something you intend to keep. I would start cooking around 5, put on a playlist of old jazz standards, open a bottle of whatever red we had left from the week, and by the time Marcus walked in from his afternoon run, the kitchen would be warm and fragrant and entirely ours. There was a particular slant of light in that apartment in the late afternoon, golden and slightly hazy, that fell across the kitchen island and made everything look like a painting of the life I had wanted. I had a habit of running my hand along the edge of the counter when I cooked, a smooth stretch of white marble that Marcus and I had chosen together at a salvage yard 2 weekends after we moved in, and the cool firmness of it under my palm felt like a kind of anchor. This is mine. We built this. This is real. Marcus worked in financial consulting. I was a project manager at a mid-sized tech company specializing in logistics software. My salary was comfortable, $78,000 a year, with bonuses that could bring it close to $90,000 in good quarters. Not lavish by city standards, but steady and honest. Enough to cover my half of the mortgage, my half of groceries and utilities, and the small repairs that come with ownership. Enough to save a modest amount, take 1 vacation a year, live without constant anxiety about what came next. We had always split shared expenses down the middle, which felt fair because we earned roughly the same. Or so I believed, or so I had been allowed to believe. Marcus's parents, Richard and Carol Weston, were not people who struggled. Richard was a senior partner at a law firm that occupied 3 floors of a midtown office tower. Carol ran her own interior design studio with projects in Dubai, Singapore, and several private residences in the Hamptons. Between them, they earned, I would confirm this later with help, close to $820,000 a year. They owned a 4-bedroom house in Greenwich, drove 2 late-model German cars, and vacationed in Tuscany and the south of France with the easy regularity of people for whom travel is not a luxury, but a baseline expectation. They had a housekeeper who came twice a week and a landscaper who came once. They were not people who needed help. They were not people who should have ever looked at my salary and seen something available for harvesting. But that is exactly what they saw, and what made it so effective, what made it work for as long as it did, was that they had quietly, patiently trained Marcus to see it the same way. I first met Carol and Richard 19 months before our wedding at a dinner at their Greenwich house that I later came to think of as an audition I didn't know I was performing. The house was immaculate and tastefully expensive, the kind of home that has a name for each of its rooms and a story for each piece of furniture. The entrance hall had a chandelier that probably cost more than my first car. Carol served rack of lamb with a citrus fennel salad, and she was warm to me in a way that felt slightly too precise, as if she had calculated the exact temperature of warmth that would keep me at ease without letting me forget whose table I was sitting at. Richard refilled my wine glass without being asked and asked questions about my work with what seemed like genuine interest, until I realized he was mapping the contours of my financial situation the way you'd map terrain before deciding where to build. That first dinner, Carol had asked about my salary in a specific, roundabout way. Is the tech sector treating you well? I hear some companies are very generous with project managers these days. When I mentioned a figure, she nodded slowly with the unhurried air of someone receiving a confirmation. I drove home that night with Marcus's hand on my knee and the comfortable sense that the evening had gone beautifully. I was wrong about almost everything. The first year of our marriage was genuinely good. Marcus was attentive and funny, and we had the kind of easy domestic rhythm that people mean when they say they married their best friend. We argued sometimes about logistics, about the specific grammar of compromise, but nothing felt structural. The Westons visited 3 or 4 times a year and stayed in the spare bedroom, which I kept stocked with fresh towels and small vases of flowers, because I believed hospitality was a form of love, that making people comfortable was how you held a family together. Carol always arrived with a bottle of good wine and a light, pleasant remark about something in the apartment that could be improved. If you moved that bookshelf, the whole room would breathe better. This tile is lovely, but warmer finishes are really having a moment. I learned to smile and change the subject gracefully, and Marcus seemed to interpret this as harmony. The first Sunday in March, about 14 months into our marriage, was when something first tilted. Carol and Richard had come for a long weekend, and on the Saturday morning, while Marcus was still asleep and I stood at the counter making coffee, Carol drifted in, wearing her silk robe, and settled at the island with the unthinking ease of someone who considers herself at home in every room she enters. The apartment smelled of fresh coffee and the ghost of last night's dinner. The morning light was pale and sharp, the kind that makes everything look slightly too exposed. I handed her a mug. She wrapped both hands around it, let the steam rise, and said, with the measured casualness of someone delivering a prepared line, "Marcus mentioned you might be getting a bonus this spring." I remember the weight of my mug in my hand, the slight bitterness of the coffee brewed too strong. "He did," I said. She turned her mug in slow circles on the marble. "We were thinking, and it's only a thought, so please don't feel any pressure whatsoever, that it might be lovely to do a proper family vacation this summer, somewhere everyone could really enjoy. Tuscany, maybe, or Croatia. Richard has talked about Croatia for years and never does anything about it." She smiled at me, and her smile was warm and smooth and landed precisely nowhere near her eyes. I mentioned it to Marcus that evening, careful to keep my voice light. He shrugged and said his mother was just enthusiastic about travel. "She's not asking you to pay for it," he said. "She's floating an idea." I let it go. I believed him, or told myself I did, because the alternative, that his parents were quietly mapping my bonus before it had even arrived, felt too unsettling to hold. Over the following months, the requests came in a pattern so gradual that each one felt isolated and manageable. A dinner in the city where Richard made a long theatrical show of searching his jacket pockets, while Carol looked at me with a soft, expectant expression. A weekend in August where Marcus mentioned, in a careful tone I had not yet learned to recognize as rehearsed, that his parents were going through a slow period with invoices, which made no sense given Carol's client roster, and that it would mean a great deal if we could cover the hotel for a family gathering in the Berkshires. A birthday dinner for Richard at a restaurant in Tribeca that cost more than my monthly car payment, where I sat with my stomach tight and my card already out, quietly restructuring the rest of my month around the bill. Each time, Marcus framed it as temporary. Each time there was a story. Each time I absorbed it, because I had been raised to understand that family takes care of each other, and I had not yet accepted that this understanding was being used against me. I started to notice that Marcus would become subtly distant in the days before these requests arrived, not withdrawn, nothing dramatic enough to confront directly, but quieter, slower to respond, as if he were translating something internally before he spoke. He would kiss me on the forehead instead of the mouth when he left for work in the mornings, and I would stand in the hallway after the door closed and feel something low and unnameable, a vibration in the floor of things that hadn't been there before. I told my friend Diane about it over lunch in October. She listened to everything without performing sympathy, then said, with the directness I had always relied on her for, "Sarah, do you actually know what they earn?" I didn't. Not precisely. Marcus had always been vague about his parents' finances, a vagueness I'd attributed to a general discretion around money, a privacy I'd respected because I was raised to understand that asking directly about income was bad manners. It had never occurred to me that the boundary might exist not to protect privacy, but to protect a plan. "Find out," Diane said, "because what you're describing doesn't sound like a family in need. It sounds like a family that has decided you're a resource, and there's a real difference between a family that's struggling and a family that has simply located someone willing to pay." I went home that evening, made dinner, set the table, poured 2 glasses of wine, and waited. When Marcus came in, I asked him directly, while he was still in the hallway with his coat half off, what did his parents earn? He looked at me with the expression of a man who had prepared an answer he'd hoped would never be needed. He hung up his coat, poured a glass of water, drank half of it standing at the counter with his back to me. Then carefully he told me about his father's partnership income. I asked for a number. He gave me one. Then I asked about Carol. He gave me another. I sat at the kitchen table and let both numbers settle into the silence. "So together," I said quietly, "they earn approximately 10 times what I earn." "It's not really about the numbers," he said. The phrase arrived so smoothly, so pre-formed, that something cold and very still moved through me. "It is entirely about the numbers," I said, "because the numbers mean that every dinner I've paid for, every hotel, every bill I've quietly restructured my month around, I did all of that on a salary that is a fraction of what they bring home in a single week, and at no point did anyone think that was worth mentioning to me." He told me I was overreacting. He reminded me that his parents had contributed $15,000 toward our down payment. I pointed out that $15,000 on a now appreciated property did not constitute a lifetime claim on my income. He said his mother just didn't think about money the way I did, that she came from a world where these things flowed naturally between family members. I sat across from him at the table we had bought together, and I watched him speak, and I felt the particular cold of understanding, something you have been successfully avoiding for a long time. I let him talk. I nodded in the places that seemed to require it, but something had moved in the architecture of what I trusted, something small and foundational, and no amount of nodding was going to put it back. What I didn't yet know, what I was still 3 weeks away from discovering, was that this conversation was the least of it. The numbers Marcus had given me were real, but the story around them was not, and the spreadsheet I was about to find on his laptop was going to rewrite everything I thought I knew about the last 2 years of my marriage. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after that conversation at the kitchen table, and Marcus had left his laptop open on the desk in our home office. He had gone to the gym, told me so on his way out, kissed my forehead, closed the front door. I had been meaning to print a document for work, and my own laptop was running a slow update, and his was right there, screen still lit. I sat down without much thought. I moved the cursor to minimize his open browser window, and then I saw the tab behind it. It was a spreadsheet, Google Sheets, shared between 2 accounts, Marcus's work email and another I recognized immediately as his mother's. The title of the document was Family Financial Planning. 1 letter. My initial. I remember the exact quality of the silence in the apartment at that moment. The low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a car passing on the street below, the specific stillness of a room when something irrevocable is about to happen. I clicked on it because there was nothing else to do. The spreadsheet had 7 columns. The first was labeled month. The second, S gross income, E terminans. The third is bonus, estimated. The fourth, joint account balance. The fifth, and this was where I pressed my fingers hard against my lips, available for reallocation. The sixth, transferred. The seventh, remaining to target. There was data going back 18 months. My hands were very steady, which surprised me when I thought about it afterward. I had expected the physical chaos people describe in these moments, the inability to breathe, the shaking, the dropped phone. But instead, there was a strange, crystalline stillness, as if my body had already understood what my mind was still processing and had made a decision to get very quiet about it. I scrolled through every row, my salary estimated, my bonus projected, the balance of our joint account, which Marcus managed, which I had trusted him to manage because he worked in finance and was better at it, which I now understood was not a statement of competence, but a strategy. And then, column by column, the amounts, the transfers, the small increments, each one unremarkable in isolation, each one quiet enough to look like noise in a monthly statement, each one moving from our joint account to an account I did not recognize. At the bottom of the spreadsheet in a cell highlighted pale yellow, total reallocated to date. The number was $34,200. I photographed every tab, every row, every column heading, the shared account addresses at the top of the page, and the pale yellow cell at the bottom. I did this slowly and carefully, the way you do something when you understand the next hour is going to require evidence. Then I closed the browser window, returned it to where it had been, and went to the kitchen to make tea I didn't drink. When Marcus came home, I was sitting at the table with my hands around the cold mug. He came in smelling of the gym, said something light about the subway, put his bag down, and then he looked at me and stopped. "Sarah, what's wrong?" I put my phone on the table between us, open to the photograph of the spreadsheet. I watched his face. I watched the color leave it, starting at the cheeks. I watched the sequence of expressions. Confusion performed, then recognition suppressed, then something close to relief, as if a long-held breath was finally being released. He picked up the phone. He looked at the screen. He put it down. He said nothing. $34,200, I said. 18 months. Explain that to me. The apology came first, poorly assembled, like something built from the wrong materials. He was sorry. He hadn't known how to tell me. It wasn't what it looked like. And this was the sentence that made something genuinely sharp move through my chest because of everything he could have said. That one was the most insulting. "It is exactly what it looks like," I said. He said his mother had come to him last year with a proposal. That was the word he used. She had pointed out, he said, not meeting my eyes, that my salary was the steadiest income in the household, that his consulting income was variable, that hers and Richard's were tied up in business overhead and investment structures. I stared at him. She had framed it as a family loan arrangement, he said. The money would be paid back. He had meant to tell me. I asked whose account the money had gone into. He said his mother's operating account. I said, "She earns $400,000 a year. You told me so yourself. And she took $34,000 from a woman who earns a fifth of that, and you helped her." And then he said, and this was the second twist, the one that turned something in my chest from grief into something colder and harder. "There's more." He went to the office. He came back with a manila folder. Inside was a document I had never seen. A loan agreement dated 14 months ago, bearing my name and my signature, except I had never signed it. The handwriting was close to mine, close enough that a glance would accept it, but wrong in the way a copy is wrong. Slightly too regular, missing the careless, uneven pressure of the real thing. It was a loan agreement for $50,000. Collateral. Our apartment. My apartment. The one I had paid half of. The one whose marble countertop I touched every evening like a prayer. "She had a notary," Marcus said quietly. "I didn't know about the collateral until last month." He said the last part as if discovering it. 1 month ago made him something other than complicit. I looked at the document. I looked at the forged signature. I felt something happen inside me that I can only describe as a door locking from the inside, a clean, decisive click, and then a stillness that felt nothing like grief and everything like clarity. I picked up my phone. I called Diane. She answered on the second ring, heard 3 sentences from me, and said, "Don't say anything more to him tonight. I'm calling you back in 10 minutes." She called back in 8. She had already found the number for a family law attorney named Patricia Reyes. Sharp, careful, and not given to wasting time. I left a message that night. Patricia called back the next morning at 9. I brought everything to the meeting: the spreadsheet photographs, 18 months of bank statements I had spent the night downloading and organizing, the forged loan document, and a written timeline I had typed at 2 in the morning because sleep had not been available to me. Patricia looked at all of it. Then she folded her hands and said, "The forged signature alone is a felony. The fraudulent loan agreement touching marital property compounds it significantly, and the documented transfers give us a very strong civil case on top of the criminal exposure." I asked what my options were. We talked for 2 hours. I left with a list and the sensation of someone who has been underwater for a long time and has just broken the surface. I called my father that evening. He lived in Ohio, was retired, and had never once said anything critical about Marcus in 3 years of marriage, because he was not a man who offered opinions he hadn't been asked for. When I told him what I had found, the silence on his end was the silence of a man who had suspected something and waited with great patience to be proven right. He said, "Tell me what you need." I said I needed him to come. He booked a flight for the following morning. The confrontation happened on a Saturday. 5 days later, Carol and Richard arrived at noon. Carol in cream cashmere with her composed, practiced expression, Richard slightly behind her with his hands in his pockets, like a man who has learned that a step back creates distance from consequences. My father was sitting in the armchair in the corner of the living room. Carol's eyes moved to him briefly and registered something she quickly smoothed away. She turned to me with a warm, concerned expression. "Darling, you sounded so serious on the phone. Is everything all right?" "No," I said. "Sit down." I put the loan document on the coffee table, the spreadsheet printout beside it, 18 months of bank statements, highlighted in yellow, beside that. Carol looked at the table. Her expression held its shape for 3 or 4 seconds, and then something shifted behind her eyes, and what replaced the warmth was not panic, but calculation. She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the window. Richard looked at the loan document and then looked at his wife. "Carol," I said, "that is my forged signature. I have already met with a criminal attorney. The document has been formally logged. The account transfers are fully documented, and a civil claim is being prepared. I want the $34,200 returned to our joint account within 10 business days. I want the fraudulent loan agreement voided in writing with notarization in the same window. And I want a signed acknowledgement that no claim exists or will ever be made against this property." Carol opened her mouth. "You're being dramatic, Sarah. This was a family arrangement that Marcus agreed to." "Marcus agreed to wire money from an account containing my salary," I said. "That is not a family arrangement. That is theft. The forged document makes it fraud." She looked at Marcus then with the compressed, commanding expression of a woman who has always expected her son to handle the inconvenient things for her. Marcus looked at the window. He didn't speak. It was the most honest thing he had done in 18 months. "After everything this family has given you," Carol said, turning back to me, her voice shifting into something softer and more dangerous, her eyes going bright. "After everything we have done, I could not believe it when Marcus told me what you earned and how little you contributed to the actual needs of this family. We have standards, Sarah. You knew that when you married him. I let the room stay quiet for a moment. My father didn't move. Then I said, "You earn, between the two of you, more than 10 times what I earn. You own a house worth over $3 million. You have investment accounts and a client list that spans 2 continents. You have taken $34,000 from me through deception and put my home at risk with a document bearing my name without my consent. And you are sitting in my apartment telling me I don't contribute enough." I paused. "I want you to hear every word of that." Carol stood. She said she didn't have to listen to this in her son's home. I said this was not her son's home. It was a jointly owned marital property, and her name appeared on none of the deeds. Richard put his hand on her arm. He had not spoken once. He looked, for the first time in my memory, like a man who understood that a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed, and who was quietly calculating the damage. They left. Carol walked out without looking at me. Richard paused at the door, turned back, and nodded once. The nod of a man acknowledging the weight of something he helped create, and then followed his wife down the hall. Marcus and I sat in the apartment for a long time after that. My father made coffee in the kitchen without being asked, and the smell of it, dark, a little bitter, exactly right, moved through the rooms, and outside the windows the city continued doing what the city does. Carol and Richard returned the $34,200 within 8 days, wired to the joint account with no message, no apology, only a bank reference number. The fraudulent loan agreement was voided and notarized within the same window, executed through their family attorney. Whether Patricia's letter detailing their criminal exposure had accelerated this cooperation, I cannot say with certainty. I have my suspicions. Marcus and I did not survive it. That is the part that still carries weight, not because I miss what we had at the end, but because I grieve what I believed we had at the beginning. We attended 3 sessions with a couples therapist who was patient and clear-eyed. In the 3rd session, I said I didn't know how to rebuild trust with someone who had looked at a spreadsheet bearing my initial for 18 months and said nothing. Marcus said he understood. We separated in February. The divorce was uncontested and completed in 6 months. I kept the apartment. He did not contest that either. There is a Sunday in early autumn, about 9 months after all of this, that I return to often in my mind. I was cooking dinner alone. Rosemary chicken, the same recipe I had made 100 times, and the jazz was on and the light was doing that golden, hazy thing it does in September, falling across the marble counter in exactly the way I had always loved. I ran my hand along the edge of it. Cool, smooth, solid. And I understood, standing there with the smell of rosemary in the air and the music low and the city doing its quiet Sunday thing outside the windows, that the feeling I had always sought in that gesture, the anchor, the proof that something was real and mine, had never required him to be there. It had been mine from the beginning. Some things you lose. The version of yourself who believed that the people who said they loved you were always telling the truth. She doesn't fully return, and I have stopped expecting her to. What came in her place is something quieter and considerably more useful. The habit of looking directly, of asking the question out loud, of understanding that the word family is not a reason to stop thinking. The marble counter is still there. The light still finds it on Sunday afternoons. And when I put my hand against it now, what I feel is exactly what I always felt. And what I know now has always been true. It is solid, it is cool, and it is entirely mine.